Welcome to Rise Untold, where the stories behind the spotlight come alive. October 12th, 1997. A small plane takes off into the California sky. Inside the cockpit sits John Denver, the man who gave the world songs of hope, love, and longing. A voice that once soared higher than the mountains he sang about. But within minutes, his flight turns fatal. The plane crashes into the Pacific Ocean. John Denver is gone. Just 53 years old, the world was left reeling. Fans were stunned. How could this happen? How could a man who seemed to embody life, freedom, and beauty be ripped away so suddenly? The headlines told us it was an accident. But as the years went by, questions began to surface. Whispers turned into theories. And what at first seemed like a tragic mishap began to look more like a mystery. This is the shocking truth about John Denver's death. To understand that final flight, we have to step back into his life. Born Henry John Deutschendorf Jr., he wasn't supposed to be a star. The son of a U.S. Air Force pilot, John grew up moving from base to base, carrying loneliness like a shadow. His guitar became his only constant, the one thing he could cling to when the world around him shifted. That guitar led him to music, and music led him to U.S. By the 1970s, John Denver wasn't just famous. He was everywhere. His voice was on radios, his face on TV specials, his name on sold-out arenas. Songs like Take Me Home, Country Roads, Annie's Song, and Rocky Mountain High weren't just hits. They became part of America's soul. He was the clean-cut folk singer with a wide smile and a pure heart. But behind that golden image, life was complicated. Denver wrestled with broken marriages, career struggles, and the crushing weight of fame. He also had a deep love for flying. His father, a decorated Air Force pilot, had taught him about planes. For John, the sky wasn't just freedom, it was destiny. But it was also danger. He collected aircraft, often experimenting with different models. Some said he was reckless. Others said he was just passionate. But what no one could deny was that flying gave him the same rush music once did. And it was flying that ultimately sealed his fate. On that October day in 1997, Denver climbed into a small, experimental aircraft called the Rutan Long Easy. It wasn't the kind of plane you'd find in a commercial hangar. It was lightweight, with a unique design, and it required skill. Witnesses later recalled seeing the plane make a series of strange maneuvers before it dove into the ocean near Monterey Bay. The crash was immediate. John Denver died on impact at first. Investigators labeled it pilot error. They claimed Denver had tried to switch fuel tanks midair and lost control. They said he wasn't properly trained on that particular aircraft's quirks. But as reports emerged, the story grew murkier. Why was he flying an experimental plane with known safety issues? Why had the fuel selector been placed in a position so awkward it forced pilots to twist dangerously in their seats? And why wasn't John Denver, a man with flying experience, able to recover? Some insiders whispered that Denver had been warned. The aircraft wasn't standard. It had been modified. The fuel system was unusual and confusing. Even seasoned pilots found it risky. Was this a tragedy waiting to happen? Or was there more behind the crash? Friends pointed out that John was in good spirits that day. He had projects lined up. He wasn't reckless with his life. But there were other shadows. Denver had faced issues with his pilot's license. At the time of his death, he wasn't technically authorized to fly because of past incidents. So why was he in the cockpit? Was it a desperate act of defiance, or simply his love of the skies pushing him forward? Then came the rumors. Some claimed sabotage. Others whispered about the pressures he faced, financial troubles, fading fame, personal demons. Was John Denver simply unlucky that day, or was there someone who wanted him silenced? The official reports never suggested foul play, but fans, and even some aviation experts, weren't convinced. They pointed to inconsistencies in the investigation, to the strange circumstances surrounding the plane itself. And then, there was John's own history. His songs often carried themes of longing, sadness, and escape. Lyrics that, in hindsight, felt almost prophetic. "I am the eagle. I live in high country," he once sang. "Caught on the wing. Half my life's been spent on the run." Was his obsession with flying just a metaphor turned real? Did John Denver's passion for the sky become the very thing that destroyed him? The truth is, John's death lives in a gray space. On paper, it was an accident. In the hearts of his fans, it was something harder to accept. A cruel twist of fate that robbed the world of a voice it wasn't ready to lose. But maybe the real shock isn't in how he died, but in what his death revealed. That behind the smiling folk hero was a man searching for peace, always caught between the stage lights and the quiet of the mountains. That even icons carry fragile hearts. That sometimes the very thing that makes us feel alive can also be what ends us that I in the decades since. John Denver's legacy hasn't dimmed. His music still echoes through generations. His songs are sung in classrooms, in stadiums, in small towns across the world. He may be gone, but his spirit lives on every time someone whispers the words, "Country roads, take me home." And perhaps that's the truth no report or rumor can erase. That while the crash took his body, it could never silence his voice. John Denver didn't just die in that plane. He soared, one last time, into the endless sky he always dreamed of. Think about it. His entire life was a journey toward the heavens. From the moment he picked up his first guitar, his music was filled with imagery of open roads, high mountains, and endless skies. He wasn't writing songs for fame. He was writing prayers, invitations, visions of a better world. His melodies carried people away from their pain and lifted them into something higher. That's why his death in the air feels so haunting, so poetic. It wasn't just an accident. It was the closing of a circle. A man who lived for freedom in the sky returning to it, forever. But here's the part that matters. The plane may have fallen, but his spirit didn't. Because what John Denver left behind cannot crash, cannot drown, cannot be silenced. His songs are eternal. And every time they play, every time someone hums Country Roads on a quiet night or sings Rocky Mountain High under a starlit sky, John Denver rises again. That if you listen closely, his music was always a dialogue with the human soul. He wasn't afraid to show his fragility. His songs admitted loneliness, longing, heartbreak, but they always circled back to love, hope, and home. That's why people connected with him. Not because he was perfect, but because he was human. And yet, somehow, in that humanity, he became larger than life. And that's why his story still lingers. Not just because of how he died, but because of what he represents. We all carry our demons. We all chase passions that sometimes put us in danger. We all search for freedom in a world that often feels too heavy. John Denver embodied that struggle. He wasn't just a singer. He was proof that you can be broken and still create beauty. That you can lose and still give. That you can fall and still inspire. That if he could face his demons, embrace his passion, and still leave behind beauty in the wake of tragedy, maybe there's a lesson for us too. Maybe the lesson is that our worth isn't measured by how long we live, but by what we leave behind. John Denver lived 53 years. But in those years, he gave the world music that will last for centuries. That's impact. That's legacy, maybe. The lesson is that our passions, no matter how risky, are what make us alive. For John, it was the sky. For you, maybe it's something else. But denying passion is like denying breath. Sometimes, even knowing the danger, we choose to fly anyway. And maybe that's not recklessness. Maybe that's courage. Maybe the lesson is that tragedy doesn't erase beauty. His death was sudden, shocking, heartbreaking, but it didn't destroy what he created. If anything, it amplified it. After October 1997, millions listened to his music again with new ears. Songs once seen as simple folk ballads became haunting, prophetic. Lyrics about mountains and skies suddenly felt like farewells. And in that way, John Denver's art deepened after his death. It became not just music, but memory. Not just melody, but legacy. That's the strange gift of loss. It makes us listen harder. It makes us hold tighter. And so, in losing John Denver, the world didn't forget him. It immortalized him. Think of it this way. If you climb a mountain and fall, the world may remember the fall. But if, on your way up, you left behind flowers, songs, and hope, then the fall becomes just one moment in a greater story. John Denver fell from the sky, yes. But what he left on the ground, what he left in our hearts, is far greater than the tragedy. And maybe, just maybe, the songs outlive the singer. Maybe that's the only kind of immortality we get in this world. The echoes of what we create, the love we give, the hope we leave behind. Because John Denver's voice still rises every time someone feels homesick and sings, "Take Me Home." Country Roads. His spirit still soars every time someone looks at the mountains and whispers, "Rocky Mountain High." His heart still beats every time someone plays Annie's song at a wedding, a funeral, a quiet evening of love. That's immortality. That's what it means to live forever. Because if John Denver could fall from the sky and still rise in our hearts, maybe you can too. Maybe your story, like his, isn't defined by how it ends, but by what you give while you're here. Maybe the pain you carry, the mistakes you've made, the fears that hold you back, they don't erase your ability to leave something beautiful behind. If John Denver could wrestle with broken marriages, fading fame, loneliness, and still turn all of it into music that touched millions, then maybe your story isn't finished yet either. Maybe you can take your brokenness and turn it into a song. Maybe you can take your struggles and turn them into strength. Maybe you can fall and still rise, because that's the shocking truth hidden inside John Denver's death. Not that it happened suddenly, not that it raised questions, but that even in death, his voice sings louder than silence. His light shines brighter than the darkness. His rise is greater than his fall. Think about that for a moment. A plane went down. A man was lost. But somehow, the story didn't end there. It kept moving, kept growing, kept touching lives. Because when a person gives the world beauty, that beauty doesn't die with them. It multiplies. It spreads. It seeps into the lives of strangers they never met. John Denver may have left the earth in October of 1997, but every day since, his music has lived. Not just lived, it has comforted, inspired, and carried people through their own storms. And that's what makes his story so much bigger than tragedy. His voice became more than sound. It became memory. It became healing. It became a bridge between generations. A father hums, "Take Me Home," country roads, while driving his kids through winding hills. A couple chooses Annie's song as their wedding dance. A soldier overseas listens to Rocky Mountain High and feels, just for a moment, closer to home. That's John Denver, still alive. Not in body, but in spirit. And maybe that's the lesson hidden in the wreckage of that plane. That our lives are not measured by how we fall, but by what we leave behind. John Denver wasn't perfect. He faced demons that many never saw. He went through painful divorces. He battled with loneliness. He struggled with the pressures of fame. The critics who dismissed him, the industry that sometimes mocked him for being too soft. He wrestled with mistakes, with alcohol, with decisions that haunted him. And yet, in the middle of all that, he still gave the world songs that felt like light. Isn't that remarkable? That someone who carried so much heaviness inside could create music that lifted millions out of their own? That's the mark of a true artist. Not someone untouched by struggle, but someone who turns struggle into beauty. Maybe you can too. Maybe the heartbreak you've faced, the nights you've cried, the weight you've carried, maybe none of that was meant to destroy you. Maybe it was meant to shape you into someone who can give back, someone who can turn pain into strength, someone who can create light in the darkness. Because if John Denver could take his loneliness and make it into songs that feel like home, what's stopping you from turning your story into something that helps someone else? The shocking truth isn't just in how he died. It's in how he lived. He lived openly. He lived passionately. He lived chasing the things he loved, even when they came with risks. Music and flying. Two loves, both beautiful, both dangerous. But he didn't let fear keep him grounded. He embraced them fully, even knowing the cost. Maybe that's what courage really is. Not living without fear, but choosing to fly anyway. Choosing to create anyway. Choosing to love anyway. And maybe you've been grounded too long. Maybe you've been told your dreams aren't realistic, or your story isn't worth sharing, or your voice isn't strong enough. But John Denver's life proves otherwise. He wasn't supposed to be a star. He was shy, awkward, unsure of himself. Critics laughed at him, but he sang anyway. And that anyway changed the world. Maybe yours can too. His fall wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a lesson. A lesson that tragedy can't erase truth. That silence can't erase song. That darkness can't erase light. And if we listen closely, his story whispers something powerful. You can rise too. Not when everything is perfect. Not when the world finally applauds you. Not when your fears magically disappear. But right now, in your brokenness, in your doubt, in your struggle, you can rise. Maybe rising doesn't mean becoming famous. Maybe it doesn't mean changing the whole world. Maybe it simply means changing one heart, your own or someone else's. John Denver didn't know that a simple song about country roads would become a global anthem. He just wrote it because it was true to him. And yet, decades later, it still brings tears to strangers who never even met him. That's what rising looks like. Creating something true, even when you're scared. Sharing something honest, even when you feel small. Choosing passion over fear, even when it comes with risks. Because the shocking truth isn't just about John Denver's death. It's about what death couldn't take away. It's about what remains unshaken, even in the face of loss. His music, his message, his courage, his spirit. And maybe that's what we're all searching for. Not a way to avoid falling, but a way to rise after we do. So when you think about John Denver, don't just remember the crash. Remember the songs. Remember the smile. Remember the man who taught us that even loneliness can sing, that even sorrow can sound like love, that even endings can echo with hope. Because if John Denver could fall from the sky and still rise in our hearts, maybe you can too. Maybe your story is not defined by your failures, but by your resilience. Maybe your past is not the chain you think it is, but the foundation of something greater. Maybe your brokenness is not the end of you, but the beginning of your song. The world doesn't need perfect people. It needs honest ones. It needs voices like John Denver's. Voices that remind us of home, of love, of freedom, of peace. And maybe, just maybe, your voice is one of them. So take your brokenness, take your struggles, take your falls, and turn them into a rise. Because in the end, that's the shocking truth behind every tragedy. Loss doesn't have to silence. Darkness doesn't have to win. Falling doesn't have to be the last word. Rising can be that. It's easy to believe that when something ends, it's over. A dream lost, a voice silenced, a chapter closed forever. But if John Denver's story teaches us anything, it's that endings aren't as final as they seem. His plane went down, but his voice went up. His life ended, but his music kept breathing. His body was buried, but his spirit was lifted by the very people who loved him. That's the mystery of legacy. What we create, what we give, what we leave behind, it outlives us. Sometimes it grows even stronger after we're gone. And maybe that's the part we forget when we're caught in our own struggles. We think failure defines us. We think loss destroys us. We think falling means the story is finished. But John Denver's life proves otherwise. Maybe falling is just a pause. Maybe loss is just a doorway. Maybe tragedy is just the shadow that makes the light shine brighter. He sang about freedom, about home, about the beauty of the world. And even though he's no longer here, those songs still rise. They still touch strangers. They still remind us that no matter how heavy life gets, there is always a way to lift our eyes to the horizon. So when you think of John Denver, don't just remember the crash. Remember the rise. Remember the way he turned loneliness into melody, sorrow into hope, silence into song. And then ask yourself, if he could rise after the fall, why can't you? Because in the end, the last word doesn't belong to the fall. It belongs to the rise.